Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I'm very happy to be here today and to be able to share with you a couple of things about which I'm very much excited. Firstly, it's this brand new issue of Do magazine that presents in a very unique way 29 artists that will be important in the 21st century. The second thing is this issue has turned out not to be just a normal issue, but also an exhibition by itself. And this is due to the fact that from the very beginning, we could work together with Ulrich Obrist, and we invited him to curate a special focus on contemporary art for Do magazine. The third thing is that we are sitting here together with Ulrich, and he will tell us more details about this issue and what he thinks curating for the 21st century is all about. And the last thing is that we are glad that also here in the first row there are some artists that contributed to this magazine, and they will join us in the conversation. I hope so. My name is written here is Stefan Kaiser. I'm editor-in-chief of Do magazine. Ulrich Obrist, probably everybody knows in this room. He is curator, art critic, he's writer, and he's co-director of the Serpentine Gallery in London. And he is ranked as one of the most influential persons in the art world. So, when we asked him at the beginning of this project to suggest 8 or 10 artists, 8 or 10 newcomers, his reaction was, no way. I need more. I need 20. So then we agreed, we discussed. And then with each of his trips around the world, he told us, I need more. I have found a new proposition, a new interesting person. So we ended up with 29 artists. But we also ended up with an exquisite and a unique exhibition of contemporary young art, and this exhibition not only displays images, pictures, but also statements, visions, and a survey among the artists. So let's get a little bit deeper into this issue. Ulrich, you're well known for pushing the limits of what is possible as an exhibition. Now you made the exhibition in the form of a magazine. What interested you in doing so?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because growing up in Switzerland, Do was somehow one of my first contact zones really with art, you know, when I was maybe 10 years old or so. And so it's been very interesting to receive this invitation and somehow connect for the first time, you know, after many, many years to Do. One of the things which has to be maybe mentioned is that for me it's always been very important the museum is one possibility where exhibitions can take place, and they're like surrounded by many, many other possibilities where we can show art. And I've always been very, you know, interested in this idea how we could actually use printed, you know, matter differently. So obviously catalogs are a super important part of my activity. I mean, at least 50%, almost like the exhibitions are curated. And then something quite urgent happened, which was around 91, I think the very beginning of the 90s. I met an extraordinary man in Austria called Joseph Artner, a visionary, to whom I'd actually like to dedicate this conversation here today. He died last year, tragically, and he, together with Katrin Messner, had invented this amazing museum called Museum in Progress. Yeah. And it's still, you know, very active. You can see it on the website. It's www.mip for museuminprogress.at. And it is really a totally visionary initiative, because Artner was, similar to me, very inspired by Alexander Dorner and by this whole idea of actually the museum going beyond the walls, and how we can actually blur also art and life and can bring exhibitions and art in very sort of unexpected circumstances. So with Museum in Progress, a lot of activities started to happen. We collaborated on exhibitions in daily newspapers. We started to collaborate on exhibitions for television, sort of revisiting Gary Schum's television gallery. We started to also do actually projects very early projects on the internet with Museum in Progress, and last but not least, exhibitions on airplanes. It was basically Alighiero Boetti, who one of the first artists I had met, and Boetti was always saying, you know, we should push the boundary, we should push the boundary, and artists are always invited to do the same thing, and maybe it would be really exciting to go to the moon and do an exhibition on another planet. And that obviously remained unrealized so far, but he thought also it would be great to do an exhibition on all the airplanes of an airline. So we collaborated with Austrian Airlines and actually invited Boetti to do puzzles, which he designed for all the airplanes of the airline for an entire year. So more than 40,000 puzzles were distributed all over the world, and you can find these puzzles today. I mean, they are pieces by Alighiero Boetti, but you can find them as well in multiple shops, as you can find them in libraries, as you can find them in museum collections, but you can also find them every now and then on a thrift store, right? Because it's just a very different dissemination or infiltration. I mean, obviously, that experience with Museum in Progress was very strong, and ever since, you know, it continued to be an important part that besides doing, you know, exhibitions in museums, which I do, it's always the idea of going into other contexts. Now, when the invitation from Do came, one of the things which I thought was also interesting is that I've curated shows in 40 countries and somehow on all continents really, and lots of biennales and shows, but I have never curated anything in Switzerland. I mean, with the exception of my early sort of childhood projects and adolescence projects when I did exhibitions in apartments and kitchens and, you know, house museums, and restaurants and all of that. But after that, sort of after the early 90s, I somehow, you know, had never a show which either happened here or came back here. So it seemed interesting for the first time to do. And it obviously is a kind of an imaginary exhibition, because we must be precise. It's not that the artist would have done, you know, the layout, because that's something which would be another thing. One could actually do a completely different project where one would have a big book, you know, a little bit in a Sigler way, and the artist could design the pages. In this instance, that was not the case. In this instance, it was really an imaginary exhibition one could imagine to happen, but which happened in the magazine, and where we also felt important to give the voice to the artist. And I thought it's interesting. I mean, we live in a moment where it's much more atomized than maybe ever before. It's a true polyphony of centers. We no longer have this idea like of one art center or the quest of the absolute center. I mean, not such a long time ago, we still had the idea that maybe, you know, Paris lost the avant-garde to New York, but today we can say it's everywhere. It's no longer the idea of it being in one city or in a few cities. And so from that point of view, it's a situation which is somehow totally éclaté, you know, and atomized. And so it felt interesting to make dialogues with artists of a new emerging generation, who most of them have actually emerged after 2000, and sort of try to see if there is such a thing as a manifesto, and also to see if there is such a thing as a cohesion, no, between different artists, if different artists have groups, are there group mechanics, and some other things like that. So there were some very general questions, and we thought it was interesting to hand over to the artists, have their voice. So you will see in the magazine, it's statements by all the artists, and then answers to a few very basic questions. What is the most recent project? What is the favorite unrealized
Maybe
projects?
we'll come to this back later, because one question interests me also from the beginning, that despite the place where an exhibition takes place, you need to select. You need a selection of artists, and from this wide universe of art, you have had to choose. How did you make your selection? On what criteria?
No, it's always also, I think, you know, it's a very interesting in terms of such project, because they are constraints, but then there are also, it's a kind of a process, no? And that's also why we cannot, like with all of my projects, it wasn't possible to say where it would lead us at the beginning, no? And that happens also with my museum shows, that happens with my biennales. There's never such a thing as a master plan at the beginning, where you would like say, you know, we've got 10 artists and that's the theme, and then that's, you know, a rather illustrative sort of mode of working. But what it really is a sort of a complex dynamic process. It's a complex dynamic system with many feedback loops, and we didn't know at the beginning where we would go, and you know, it just ended up visiting lots of shows, started to make more systematically against studio visits. So it's also, you know, in this sense, it's a similar way as one would curate a biennale. It's each time a trigger for new research, you know, to go out there and see more systematically work. And so I made lots of studio visits all over the world. I went to see many, many exhibitions, and each time I saw a work I felt was exciting or urgent, I sent you an email, and Brigitte Ulmer, whom we have to mention here, who has been also very instrumental in making this issue happening, and has the whole thing has very much been a dialogue with her, and one can say it's been an email ping pong. And so, each time I would see something, I would email also Brigitte. We would then invite the artists, and it would grow little by little. So it's kind of really organic, and it's also something which really hasn't come to an end, no? Because I mean, this is a very small beginning, we can say. And as always is my project, and that's also, to do with the shows. When we open a museum show, it's not the end point, it's a small beginning, and then we let it organically grow and learn. It's a learning system. So we can easily imagine that a year or two from now, there will be a very big book, which is built on that. And we can also imagine, obviously, that all of these texts are translated, because for the moment it's only in German. So it's the beginning of a process.
Yeah, and you gave the word when you spoke about the conversation and the ongoing process that happened, and the ping pong. In this issue, there is also a contribution, a manifesto from Ulrich Obrist, and one of the most powerful teas we put it also on the cover is the 21st century is a conversation. I think this describes pretty much how you proceed now and what's going on in the world of art. Could you describe that a little?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, my methodology would never be that's something which is said a priori, because I think it would be very problematic to sort of proclaim a curatorial manifesto a priori, but it's very much a deduction, which comes out of lots of conversation with artists. And when we did the Manifesto Marathon, because we started to do at the Serpentine Gallery in London these marathons, which are a kind of a format we're exploring every year, with Julia Peyton-Johns, and she and I invite an architect or an artist to do a pavilion, to commission a pavilion, and within this pavilion we then stage a 24-hour or 48-hour event where performances, actions, talks, lectures, all kinds of things happen, and it has each year a different sort of angle or focus. So last year was about bringing art and poetry together. It's always about building a bridge from the art world to another world. And when Frank Gehry built the pavilion, it was a very open pavilion, and we somehow felt that it would be interesting for the first time to connect to Hyde Park Corner, because our gallery is in Kensington Garden, and it felt somehow urgent to have this whole aspect of free speech, because many artists who visited us were always saying, that's the thing which interests them most about the Serpentine, is that it's totally nearby that free speech zone. So we did a Manifesto Marathon, and it's during this Manifesto Marathon that many artists expressed an unease about this format. And it's actually interesting also because when we asked artists to do, my questions was about the current work, about the unrealized projects, about influences, about heroes. I'm going to explain all of that later, why these questions. And then, obviously, do you have a manifesto? And it's interesting that actually only very few artists in the issue have answered with a manifesto. There are some, latent manifestos, but there is a lot of, doubts about this format of the manifesto. Yeah. And it's interesting when we had the Manifesto Marathon, Tino Segal and Eric Hobsbawm both did not want to present a manifesto. They sort of felt it would be a too 20th century notion. I mean, Tino Segal also thought it's kind of too loud. A manifesto is a very loud thing. It's also a very masculine thing, and he felt that it would be wrong for the 21st century as an artist to proclaim manifesto. And he then declared, famously in this marathon, Tino Segal, that he thinks, that the 21st century is more of a conversation, and that's really where this sentence comes from. Yeah.
But on the other hand, what I was surprised that we watched a thing like a revival of the politics, and this could be linked to the topic of the manifesto again, because the manifesto is a statement. People want to change the world or the society, and I think this movement is still reinforcing now. How do you feel? Or are there other things that surprise you, looking at the answers of the artists?
Yes, I mean, the reason why we did a Manifesto Marathon had to do definitely with this observation, of what you evoked, that we did feel a very strong, reconnection to politics, and that we felt that, that marathon would also allow that to, allow that to articulate. And in a similar way, was also the case when we did Utopia Station with Molly Nesbitt and Rike Tiravanija a few years earlier. There also, we wanted to ask about, is there a social contract for art? And so in this sense, the Manifesto Marathon was also the follow-up project on this, on Utopia Station, one can say. But maybe we should go into these other questions, because the manifesto is not the only question we ask the artists to answer. There's also obviously the famous Alighiero Boetti question about the unrealized project. And I think that question is always very relevant, because I think, we're here at an art fair, and it's very interesting that in the art world there are these different, structures where art can appear or pop up. No, it's basically museum shows, it's gallery shows, it's biennales. There's an ever-increasing amount of biennales. When I started, there were maybe 20 or 30. Now, according to the great world expert of biennale, Thierry Raspail, he has been counting them. There are about 120, 130 biennales all over the world, which is obviously, a really huge amount. We then have, public art. We have this idea that every now and then an artist is invited to do a public art commission, 1% kind of thing, Kunst am Bau, as you would call it in German. And then you have, gallery shows, which are obviously very important for artists, and art fairs, which are very important. So these are, the different platforms or the different contexts in which art appears. And what Boetti really told me, and that was the sort of epiphany for me as a teenager, was, he told me to really listen to artists, what else could happen beyond these formats. What are projects artists would like to do, which don't necessarily fit within, because, if it fits within an art fair, a museum, a gallery, a 1%, commission, in one of these, platforms, usually the artist, can over time realize the project. But there are all these projects which don't fit in any of these boxes. And Boetti said it would be a really nice, job description for a young curator when I started, to just ask artists, what would you really like to do? And I think that's the, it's a key difference. If you go to an artist and you say, I've got this in this space, or I've got this in this, biennale, would you like to do something of this and this size, or of this and this order? Or you go to an artist and you say, what is really your desire? What is an urgent project you would like to do? So Boetti's idea was that, one could do an archive of the unrealized projects, and by actually publishing them, making them happen. And that's something which has happened quite a lot over the years, because somehow by doing books and magazines and all kinds of things about these unrealized projects, and also websites, and we're working with eFlux, for the agency of unrealized projects. It's a collaboration with the Serpentine. So, we get these projects known, and it happens a little bit like in architecture, that actually by talking about these unrealized projects, they become no longer utopia, but somehow, concrete utopia, which leads us then right away to Jona Friedman, who is going to be in the conversation, which I will moderate on Saturday. So for all of you who will be on Saturday, we'll have a conversation with 4 architects, with Keres Gantenbein, Farshid Musavi, and the legendary Jona Friedman, who is now in his mid-80s, and who is actually relevant for many, many of the issues we discussed, particularly the concrete utopia idea. Yeah.
That's the reason also why I like that you put this question in your survey. Because when last year we made a special issue for the Art Basel, and we included all these worlds you just mentioned, all these boxes. It's parallel worlds, the biennale, the curators, the experts, but what was missing were the artists itself. And now I think what's really special about this issue is that we gave the artist itself a voice. They can speak, they can present their visions, their ideas. We're coming to the close already. So you spoke about curating unrealized projects. What are your unrealized projects? What do you think the role of a curator changes in the next decade?
Yeah, I think you can never predict, how curating is going to change, because curating can only change, according to how art of the future will be, and we don't know what art of the future will be. So, artists of the future will tell us what's going to happen, to curating, and that's, leads us right back to the cover, no, which you decided to. I must say that also that whole cover idea was actually really the idea to get this idea painted. My idea was really to have these 10 theses which are all extracted from the conversations with the artist. So it's really not an a priori manifesto. And I would say the future of curating. What we definitely can observe, and I think that that's super interesting, is that there is an expanded notion of curating, and it's Joseph Beuys talked about erweiterter Kunstbegriff, so there was a kind of, he called it an expanded notion of art, and so when I started to work, that was sort of 20 years after that expanded notion of, art was proclaimed, and the notion of curating was still rather narrow. So I think basically all I have tried to do, and with many of my colleagues, curators of my generation, we've basically tried to expand curating in an analog kind of way to how art has expanded. So working with an artist like Boetti, who has expanded so tremendously, what art is and what an artwork can be, and in a visionary way, Boetti has anticipated, different forms of negotiating, a global dialogue. So one can say that, this meeting with Boetti was just an explosion for me of how we can expand curating, and that ever since, in all my dialogues with artists, has led to an ever-increased expanded field. And what has obviously happened now is that the word of curating is suddenly used more and more, also not in the art world. No, it's sort of used a lot in the blog sphere. Blogs are being curated. People have never even heard what is an art curator, call themselves curators of blogs or curators of websites. So it's going to be very interesting what's going to happen with that sort of whole notion of curating on the internet. But I feel as we have sort of about 10 minutes left, I think it's really urgent that we can hear or listen to the artists, because we have several of the artists here who participated in the issue. So I don't know if we have a microphone or... I don't know who wants to start.
Is there something you'd like to ask in particular?
No, it would be great to hear from you, but obviously, because what happens in the issue is that there is a kind of, this sort of whole question of the group, is quite present. Is there new movements? Is there new groups? Are there new collectives? Are there new manifestos? And in the early 90s, there was there weren't any movements anymore, but there was a very strong kind of cohesive generation of artists who appeared together.
I think the word you used...
and it would be really interesting to hear from you how you see that now.
I think the word you used before, atomized, is very appropriate. I think if you look through the influences in the list of people in this collection, you'll see that every artist is very much an individual and doesn't really belong anymore to a movement. Sometimes I have conversations with people who reminisce about the 19th century and wish they were part of a gang. Wouldn't it be great if we were part of the Impressionists? But I think at the end of the day, when you look through history at the artists that are really spectacular, they always seem to stand alone. Of course, we have social relationships because we're always in shows together and we exchange ideas about methodologies. But I think at our heart, we're not all looking at the same things anymore, as people probably were in the late 20th century. That's what I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I can definitely agree with that. And I was also interested when looking through the other artists. There's a lot of people that I haven't ever come across at all in the circles that are around me. But I was also interested that there's a lot of focus on other fields coming into the artist practice. So there's so little talk about other artists or other, reference to contemporary artists, of the last generation even as influences. There was a lot of focus on anthropology or writing or cooking or fields completely outside.
I think that the new structures deliver the possibility of the total exchange, but it also produces the contrary, and so I think the poles get bigger in this sense.
There was this sentence in the magazine that said, there was this thesis that said that art in the future will be produced in groups that change, that they're not staying collectives, and this is especially important for me since I'm coming out of this Basel scene and Zurich scene, running the space New Jersey, and what I can what I see a lot is that the most interesting work is often created by just people who do one work with this guy, then one work with this guy, and it's not about like a stable collaboration over time, but more like a conversation that involves like everybody around them.
Great. Yeah, when we would have sat here 2 years ago, everybody would have, especially everybody in this parallel universe, in this other boxes, would have talked about money. You have been working in that time of this huge art bubble. Does this influence you in any way? Because what I watched, reading your statements, is that there is a longing for the authenticity, that for the real thing, that the people are worldwide connected, that they know, the artists know what's going on in the world, but they try to focus on a real, also on a local experience. Would you agree, or?
Hello, can you hear me? In a sense, I don't totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, I think what Alexander was saying to an extent was that a lot of the artists are creating their whole own systems, in a sense, and relying less on this like 90s model, I'd say, of, you know, being shown in biennials constantly with the same people, and that sort of being a group voice. And I think when you're kind of creating your whole own sort of structure around your practice, which I think is becoming more and more important, especially as artists seem now to be more independent and getting better at it, and galleries especially are letting artists do all of their own sort of, you know, contact and shipping and, you know, really practical things. Artists have to have a kind of more practical sort of hold on those things. And I think what I sense from looking at the other artists, that there were a lot of people that were having their own systems, and in that sense it was really sort of nice to be able to step into other worlds rather than sort of try and have this group voice. And there were a lot of surprises as well, you know, people that I had heard about or known, but would never have thought would be, you know, kind of coming together in this way. So
one thing I think which is, but does someone else want to answer to that? Or? Because one thing which I think was also very interesting, and I know we are running out of time, so that might be...
Just got one question. It's been really interesting what's happened today, because, you know, I was really reflecting on the days of Goldsmith and Hirst and those artists who really curated themselves like in Frieze. But the question I wanted to ask, how much are you influenced these days with like art philosophers, art critics, art writers who try to maybe, I wouldn't say force, but maybe influence you into a new art movement with curating?
I didn't hear it.
Can you hear me? Yeah, the question was basically, how influenced are you with people like art writers, art philosophers, or art critics? How important are they in influencing you in a new movement of curating? Is it really important or not?
I think it's definitely, you know, I think we cannot say that this, you know, would be the only thing which, you know, which influences, but I think it's one aspect, you know, it's one dimension. And I think it's very much like in superstring theory, where you've got 11 dimensions. So there's all these different things which, you know, which enter. And obviously, I mean, one of the things which is so interesting, I think, about many of the interviews and what you're all answering in the interviews is indeed, and this sort of whole idea that many connections are established also to other disciplines. No, I mean, you mentioned anthropology. There's a lot of connections also to theater. There's a lot of connections to philosophy. There's a lot of connections to all kinds of other fields. Yet, you know, an hour ago, I had a conversation with Agnes Varda, the legendary filmmaker, who shows here at Unlimited. And, you know, we had invited her in 2003 to Utopia Station. And ever since, she thinks the art world is much, much more exciting than the film world. And, you know, spends all her time in the art world. And that happens more and more. So the question is that maybe, you know, we go towards what I would call a new Diaghilev moment, you know. So I'm not sure if we are going towards that or if it's my hope that we're going towards that. And maybe the truth is somewhere kind of like in the middle. And the new Diaghilev moment would be, and he's always been the most, I mean, he's been my biggest hero among curators. I mean, if I, you know, have to say what has been the most, you know, the most sort of strong influence or the strongest influence has been this Russian impresario. And he really brought together the greatest composers of his time, the greatest visual artists of his time, the greatest dancers of his time, and created this sort of, you know, you can almost say Gesamtkunstwerk. And I think at the moment, this incredibly strong contact zone there is between the disciplines and also the dialogues. I mean, if in the early 90s you still had a moment where there was so much collaboration happening between artists. I mean, there was really, Douglas Gordon once told me in 91, you know, we have a promiscuity of collaborations among artists. You know, now there is again a promiscuity of collaboration, but it's no longer a promiscuity of collaboration only between artists. Artists connect to many other practitioners, and these practitioners then also more and more have a desire to come to the art world. So the art world is a more exciting place than ever. The art world is actually very dull. But it's the only world right now where it potentially all can come together. I mean, we spoke also the other day with Carl Michael von Hauswolf, who is a visionary composer and you know, visual artist in Stockholm, and he was saying the music world just doesn't get it because he's in both worlds, and he says if today you really want to bring all the things together, you know, you can't do it in the music world. It wouldn't be possible, but in the art world, it's much more possible. Now, within this, you know, field, obviously, writing is unbelievably important, and and that can be art criticism, but that can also be philosophy. And I think we should also, you know, think always that very often philosophy has gone into exile, into the art world. I mean, Daniel Birnbaum is a very recent, you know, example. Arthur Danto would be an example from, you know, many decades ago. So we have, you know, lots of great philosophers who at a certain moment go into exile into the art world and then, you know, write about art. And I think that that whole connection, I mean, Pamela talks about it a lot in the conversation in, you know, in Do, that sort of whole connection to philosophy becomes also urgent again. Yeah.
So we're running out of time, and I just want to, for closing, I want to just show you two little things. The first is by Alexandre Singer, a little sketch that summarizes maybe what we're talking about. He says, what is bad art? Bad art is focused on one center, and good art is open towards everybody. Good art is a kind of a conversation, and then kick-ass art is the rest. So this is a sketch by Alexandre, and there is another thing by Pamela Rosenkrantz. When we asked her for a manifesto, she wrote a little text. I read it for you. The work of art is nothing. The work of art is not even art. The nothing which the work of art affirms realizes art. A work of art is redundant and it is abandoned. A work of art is the material form of inconsistency. Art is not a discipline. Contingency is a discipline of art. The work of art has nothing to do with form and content. It is form as well as inform. Art negates negation. It is the perforation of the medium, a hole in the facts. So thank you very much for being here with us. And you will get this Do magazine at each kiosk, in each library in Basel, and in the magazine corner in the Halle 1Z28.